Now over to the somebody who's doing it, and let's hear from Helen Thomson, and she's going to talk to us about her experience. You're going to share your slides for us, Helen, and then we can...
Yeah, thank you. So my perspective is slightly different. So it's based on experience of chairing a social impact bond in Sheffield for Sheffield Futures, which is basically set up as a subsidiary company of Sheffield Futures, which is a large charitable organisation delivering services mainly for young people in Sheffield. So when I came along as the independent chair, the decisions had all been made. The organisation had applied to deliver a social impact bond. It had all the investors on board. It had backing of government, who would then repay investors on the basis of outcomes achieved. So essentially, it was the delivery of a social impact bond was to reduce the number of young people who were excluded or not attending schools, and to achieve different positive behaviours and outcomes leading to an increase in GCSE attainment and right across Sheffield. So no small task, because it never been done on a citywide basis in a coordinated response in that way. However, I came along as the independent chair, and we had 3 social investors, and then there was 1 private sector investor who was based in Melbourne, Australia. So, didn't come along to monthly meetings very often, but, understandably. And I think the basis of it is the investors put all the money in up front for the whole of the contract, and then payments by results were to be paid by a government department. So all is in place, the new programme starts. There's a huge amount of documentation because it's taken some time in the business planning, and risk registers, business plans, cash forecast, everything has been documented down to a T, and that was agreed by government and signed off as a contract. So I thought to myself, well, that's all quite straightforward, actually. We've got a really sound basis to move on here. I thought maybe it's not too difficult after all. So first meeting is, I think it was important to establish that we all understood each other's perspectives, because you had 3 different investors, 2 of whom, or representatives of investors, knew each other, but nobody else had really met before. So it was quite important that I felt that we understood where everybody, whether it was the delivery organisation or each of the investors, 2 of whom were directors and 2 were not, as to what we were trying to achieve in this and how we would work together, so that we had a sound basis. And that was, I think, quite positive. Everybody was, this is what's important for young people in Sheffield. And although we mentioned finance, it was never the first thing to be mentioned. However, it was in that first month when the understanding was evident that we'd signed the contract with 1 government department as a pilot, as one of the first social investment bonds that had been, wasn't the first by any means, but it was one of the first tranches. And yet it was to be managed by another department of government who saw that contract very differently. There was a contract, it wouldn't be deviated from, and there was no flexibility within it, with any of the outcomes we were to achieve, except the only flexibility we did have was that we had all the money up front, so that we knew how we could manage it to deliver those outcomes. So that was a huge challenge, really, because you're working with somebody who you thought you had a contract with a very different understanding to what, as investors and the programme delivery thought they were delivering, that it was much more of a pilot and we could take more risk with it, really. However, so we hadn't factored that into the risk register, because it was so far off our radar that hadn't come onto it. Obviously, we had to address it, and some of I suppose this is the first of the ones that I wanted to say. I'm just going to share this slide with you was, and it was very much about getting the investors to work together, each of them quite different and with different levels of experience. But the challenges of the reputational risk of the organisation in being able to be delivered a contract that was now viewed very differently by the government department that was actually going to pay on results, really came into focus very, very early on. However, we knew that, and we had to learn going through that. At least we knew that at a very early stage. But had we known it before, I think we would have negotiated a different type of contract. However, that's the situation we were in. I think the next point for us, that the delivery model was absolutely critical about how we won the bid. It was very much about a youth work model, that young people at the centre, and the relationship between the young person's mentor, the youth worker, or the group work youth worker was critical to the whole outcomes being achieved, and young people going through a journey with that support. That model had to change when the number, because we weren't in control of who was coming on the project or not. We were getting referrals from schools. So you're always relying on a third party playing along with the program that you've developed. And we had 25 high schools in all of this. And as you can imagine, they all, although we're up for it at first, came in and out a little bit. So we had some very good high schools. And in fact, we had all of them on board, but they came in not quite as we'd anticipated at the beginning. So to achieve the outcomes, we were still focused on giving young people the best experience we could and achieving the outcomes. We had to change that model to one where youth workers and resources got moved around more than we'd ever anticipated. And so we changed the model somewhat. Now, that wasn't a problem for the investors at all. They said, we're not worried about what model, we want you to see the outcome. So use your money flexibly, do whatever it takes. But then internally with the organisation, if you've got professional youth workers and you're saying, actually, we don't want that sort of delivery, we want slightly different sort of delivery, and we want you to be moving around between young people and moving to different schools, I think that certainly threw up a challenge for us, and again a reputational risk about the quality of the work that we were delivering. But we worked through that quite early on, talking a lot with staff and a lot with schools and about how we were going to make it work together. But I think all the time it was about looking ahead, about what's the next issue that's going to come up, and sharing it with investors and board members, investors, and with the staff team, the organisation, so that we had really good. We highlighted things before they became big issues, and I think on the third point, on the financials, on the contractual risks. As you know, the journey for many young people is not a straight line, and where it became evident we wouldn't maybe reach our minimum base case for return on investment for investors, we had to look at rescheduling our payments, or how we were looking at our business plan and how we were managing our money. And we had time to think ahead, but the pressure was always on. And it is that balance of getting your return to investors, but your main raison d'etre is to deliver the right service for the young people that we were working with. So we eventually came up with solutions when we knew that it was unlikely, because GCE, the way GCE for maths and English had changed, was absolutely crucial. And so no longer could it be 5 GCSEs. It now had to be maths and English as part of those 5 GCEs that were key to government. We knew that government policy was on a risk register,
Okay.
But can you still hear me okay?
Yes, I can still hear you. I'm just going to try and get you to just summarise your risk in a minute, so we've got a little bit of time for Q&A, Helen.
Sorry. Yep. So what we did, we had to reschedule all the finances, which was absolutely fine by investors. We were really worried about it as an organisation. The organisational investors are absolutely fine, and it's understanding the way they move money from financial. What's the risk financially on capital repayments to what's the risk on interest repayments, and we came up with a mechanism. But it was because we kept talking and we kept exploring issues together. So very, very quickly, we kept investors close, and we invited them to celebration events. We invited them staff in. We went to schools together in order that we didn't just keep looking at the figures. There weren't board meetings that were all about figures, spreadsheets, levels of risk, but it's actually what we were there for, as well as as an addition to. So we did actually, just to finish off, we did actually deliver. We exceeded expectations right at the end, which was great. And it was tough, but it was because of the team pulled it off in the organisation through commitment, hard work, pulling out all the stops.
Okay.
I'll leave it there.
Yes, lovely. Thank you, Helen. I think what that's given us is a really practical demonstration, actually, of, in your case, multiple stakeholders. And I think there's a couple of lessons in there to pull out, which is often where you are most concerned about the risks is not where the risks appear. So you were particularly concerned about the risks with the investors, and they didn't see it as the same level of risk, and also managing lots of different moving parts, so being able to balance all those bits about risk. But I think this came back to something that Jonathan said. It's about having the conversation, it's about flagging those things early, and certainly one of the things that I would advocate is that you don't bury these things or leave them to the last last resort to talk about them, because actually when you flag these things early and talk through them, you can often come up with ways that you can work around them.